of the VR technology. The works, which have been created around 25 years ago now, are presented at Fotografisk Center after undergoing a restoration to comply with technological standards of today, but with the aim of keeping the look and the feel of the original artworks. If you haven't visited the exhibition yet, I encourage you to come and experience. Welcome. Experience these groundbreaking works that is on view for the first time in Denmark. A large-scale solo exhibition with Jakob has also just opened at Art Museum in Osmose. So it's quite an amazing coincidence that two great internationally recognized VR artists exhibit in Denmark at the same time. I would like to thank ETHOS Lab here at the IT-University of Copenhagen for hosting the event. And especially thank you to you, Henriette, who is the lab manager, and PhD student Barbara. Barbara has also played a crucial role in conceptualizing the exhibition with Char Davies at Fotografisk Center, and she has also contributed to the exhibition catalog with a text and an interview with Char. And we have a lot of catalogs from the exhibition here, so you're very welcome to take a copy with you. I would further like to thank DJ Fotograferne for supporting this talk, and also thank you to Art Week. The event is a part of Art Week and Copenhagen Photo Festival, and Art Week opens today with a grand opening party later today. And now I would like to give a warm welcome to Char Davies, who is online with us from Montreal, Canada. And a warm welcome to you, Jakob Kudsk Steensen, as well. Thank you so much, both of you, for accepting this invitation and for giving us the opportunity to learn more about your works and your existing practices. A warm welcome as well to the moderator of the talk, Mogens Jacobsen, who is an artist and lecturer here at the IT-University of Copenhagen. Thank you so much, Mogens, for moderating the talk, and I will now leave the word to you. Thank you.
So I can say thank you to Sina. I don't know, is this on or is it muted? Now it's on. Cool, and I hope Char can hear us as well. Thanks to Barbara, and thanks to all of you for joining us in this thing. Also, a few of you are online, I can see. Thanks, welcome to the people online. Great to see you all, and thanks for your interest in this sort of artistic practice. There are a few practicalities. As you might have guessed, we are streaming this, and we're also recording it. So if you say something or do something strange down here, you will be recorded. You can hide in the back, no problem, but I have to tell you, as Sina said, we have this very rare and fortunate position to present two very important artists working within this field of virtual reality or real-time generated landscapes. Jakob Kudsk Steensen in the flesh, right here, and Char Davies online from Canada with this forest behind her on the screen. Not only, as Sina said, are they here to present their work and share their thoughts with us. Both of them have solo exhibitions in Denmark right now. You can go experience the works yourself, and of course you should, as Sina said, at Fotografisk Center. Until I just got the date right, it's mid-August. You can go and see two important works by Char, Osmose and Ephémère. And if you go to ours, and you should, go to ours, the huge museum in Aarhus, you will see a solo exhibition by Jakob Kudsk Steensen, until the end of October. So you have a little time to go to Aarhus after you've seen Char Davies here in Copenhagen, and you should go to see both exhibitions. I can really recommend it. But I sort of framed the talk today. I see Char and Jakob are two generations of artists working with these real-time generated digital landscapes. both sharing a huge interest in nature and environment. But artistic renderings of landscapes, drawings of paintings of sceneries have a long history. I don't know nothing about it, but Googling it this morning, it seems like that the landscape painting drawing started in the 4th century in Asia, Japan, and China. This is a big thing, but that's because we're in this forum, concentrate on the photographic image. How many of you know this image? Oh, one. Well, it's a very famous photographic image by the photographer Andreas Gursky. It's this painting, this photo is super famous. It used to be the it used to be the most expensive photo ever sold. And it's you can see the title, but it's the River Rhine in Düsseldorf near Germany. As you can see, it's kind of boring. All the distracting elements like people, dogs, buildings, factories were digitally removed from this photo. As Gorky said, I have to quote this right, this view of the Rhine cannot be obtained in situ. A fictitious construction was required to provide an accurate image of a modern river. So this is the most accurate rendition of the river Rhine. When talking about constructed or fictitious sceneries, there's another painting, you might have seen it. It was displayed in Louisiana Museum of Modern Art by another German photographer, Thomas Demand, called, again, the title is hidden due to the Zoom thing, but the title is Clearance or Lichtung, I think. It's totally constructed. This beautiful scene is a model built in the studio of the photographer. It is cut in paper leaves. There are 270,000 individually cut leaves, cut in paper, mounted on a steel frame. And when we go totally digital now, I'm jumping somewhere completely different. In the 90s, the days of artificial life, if any of you have ever heard about this, Carl Sims, the American Carl Sims, populated the 3D worlds using genetic algorithms, generating or evolving creatures and plants. So these landscapes were not, they are 3D models, not real time, but 3D models in animations. They were not modeled, they were evolved by algorithms. So, sort of to frame this dialogue, conversation today, discussion, I would like to frame it like, how do people, artists engage in nature, and what are the new ways of rendering nature in art? But even though I promised Char not to be too technical, we are at the IT-University. So let me shortly talk about some issues in the long history of virtual reality or responsive virtual environments. There are so many things in the back catalog of VR, but going back 60 years, you can see the date down here. 60 years. I think this device, Animac by Lee Harrison, is important, especially if you go see Char's work. You might see the connection. This is a real-time animation device. It's not a digital device, it's an analog animation computer being controlled by a dancer in this suit, like a bodysuit, that tracks the movement of the dancer and transfers it to this animated character. I don't know if there's any ITU students down here today. It doesn't seem like, but another important person is Ivan Sutherland. He's important in computer science. He did a lot of things, but he also apparently was the inventor of the head-mounted display in '68. So this is, I know it looks quirky, but the experiments often look quirky. This is one of the first head-mounted displays ever. But then, going huge amount of time forward, in the 90s, we started to see artists working with these techniques or technologies. One important piece I remember was this legible city by Australian artist Jeffrey Shaw. This is, I don't know if you can see it, it's a bicycle, it's a stationary bicycle where you bike around a city constructed by letters and sentences. So when you ride along the side, you have all these words, passing all these words. And the work is based on actual ground plans of cities, Manhattan, Amsterdam, Nagoya. And biking through these sort of became a journey of reading. Then another important piece is when head-mounted display began to enter the art world. There were not that many artists working with head-mounted displays. I remember this piece, Home of the Brain by Monika Fleischmann, Wolfgang Strauss. I think it was a collaboration with this company Art Plus Com. Some of you might know in Berlin. But this was a Home of the Brain was a piece where you entered a world with 4 rooms. Well, every room was dedicated to a philosopher. I think it was Weizenbaum and what was the other? Marvin Minsky, Brillo Flusser, I think. And you could walk around and you could even see a character standing here. But then in '95, I saw Osmose by Char Davies. And this was different. It was also using head-mounted display. But it was different. It was not so hard-edged. It was not so rigid. It was a lot softer and more complex. And it had an unusual way of navigating or behaving in this space. Normally, and you still see today, you are a set of hands floating in space in a virtual world. But in this, you didn't have hands, but you navigated the world by breathing or by leaning back and forth, switching the center of gravity. And this is one of the pieces you should go and experience yourself at Fotografisk Center. But then came something else. I just read it was called the Winter of Virtual Reality. In the late 90s, it seems like virtual reality was forgotten for almost 15 years. I don't know why, we discussed it yesterday, but it might be due to the overhyped expectations, as you can see in this magazine from '95. And some say it's the attention went elsewhere, it became focused on the internet and the web instead. So all of the interest went there, all the attention went there, and the money went there as well. So Char told me that there was a long period where nobody was producing head-mounted displays. You couldn't get hold of them. You had to repair the old ones if you had them. So there was no real attention in our action in this field. Another thing, I remember seeing Char's work in '95, and this, well, I'm working here with technology. It has this impressive and also extremely expensive silicon graphics hardware running the whole thing. But technology has evolved a lot, become a lot more capable, a lot less expensive, especially the development of specialized graphical processors, the GPUs, have accelerated fast in the last few years, mainly because they are a key component in machine learning and cryptocurrency. So you can see where the money goes. But this means that all these hardware devices have become much more accessible for many of us. And we're now seeing a second generation, I would call it, of these real-time landscape, real-time environment works. And one such artist is Jakob Kudsk. As you might have guessed his name, he's Danish. I don't know where you live at the moment.
I live in Berlin right now.
He's living in Berlin. I hear on my right ear, he's living in Berlin. Jakob's work is highly distinctive, stands out from most other contemporary artists working in this field of I wouldn't use the word VR, but generated landscape or whatever. You have worked, as far as I know, with head-mounted things as well, VR, traditional VR, sorry. but you are also exhibiting very large-scale works, and by large-scale I mean both large-scale in the physical exhibition space and also in the constructed virtual environment of all those huge landscapes, often with very detailed landscapes and our environmental storytelling. So you can understand why I see a familiarity between the works, the worlds, thematics of Char Davies and Jakob Kudsk Steensen. I don't know if you have met before, Char?
No, I've not met Char.
Okay, yeah, great. Then I'm certainly looking forward to this meeting with the two of you. I have asked both artists to start with originally I said short, but I think we have a lot of time, a presentation of their work. And then I hope a dialogue will evolve after that. And of course, please join in, ask questions, comment. There are some practicalities. You will need a microphone because Char should also hear what we're saying here. But do something and we will get the microphone down to you somehow. But let's get started. Jakob, welcome. It's my great pleasure to present you.
Oh, okay. Cool. So I think I'll just present some work for 10 minutes or something. I think it's exciting for me to talk to Char, an artist that I really, look up to in a way and have looked at for a long time, because when I started, so I worked in video game technologies since I was a teenager, worked in like games, made like artworks, been experimenting with it for a long time. And then when kind of this second big hype commercial wave of VR came around, it felt as if the history was completely forgotten. So suddenly all the exhibitions and artists and curators and press was like, first time artists doing this, first time VR or this. And that was kind of frustrating because artists like Char Davies was kind of missing for this. So I think it's extremely exciting to be invited here to do a talk with Char Davies and you. So I'll just kind of explain my work briefly, so we can have more space for some conversations and for Char to show it. But this is me. This is last summer in the Spreewald of Berlin. So typical for my practice more and more is a kind of play with chaos and control. So I have a studio in Berlin with 7 people working there. When I make projects, I start like 2 years before, usually takes like a year to make. And then they become on increasingly exhibitions that tour, and also VR projects that we're now going to publish so people can experience them like at home, like you do video games. So we're kind of creating this parallel way of creating art, both in museums and outside of the art world as well. So it's like I increasingly create these quite elaborate landscapes. And when you work in these technologies, you need to build a framework, you need to make a design, you need to fundraise, you need to be connected to a lot of different entities. So you need to construct something with control. But then it's like inside of that box of control, I increasingly put a kind of chaos in a way, and the chaos arises from a landscape. So the way I create work now is that I go out into different environments with field biologists, with musicians and collaborators, also poets and writers. And then we spend like months in these locations. And at first we go in as well, kind of rational, like a scientist tells, like I've been working with wetlands for the past 2 years, and they tell why are wetlands important. We've forgotten wetlands, they create fresh water, and we've forgotten that they exist right beneath our feet. So that's kind of like an ecosystem that we go to first. And then over time, talking to these scientists, suddenly they start sharing a very personal, emotional relationship with where they are. Like they might suddenly show you a flower, a detail in a rock, a leaf, a tree or an animal or something, an insect that is kind of irrelevant from their profession, professionally speaking, but that they're very passionate about as humans because they've spent like decades in one location. So based on these stories, then suddenly myself and collaborators start building worlds, start building stories, and we start digitizing all these different unique elements. So this is, for example, me in the landscape, and like we've literally spent 2 months on these canals with something called the Spreewald south of Berlin, because I did a big project on swamps. So like on the other side of the camera, there are 2 canoes, and there's also someone recording sound. And we move through these landscapes over 3 weeks, digitizing some of these different elements. And we go like multiple times to scan all this material. So we kind of digitize biomaterial in a way, through sound and through something called photogrammetry. It's a very photographic process. Oh, that was the sound. Okay, here. Yeah, so this is an example of what the work can kind of become. This is a VR piece called Liminal Lands. So this is a piece I started showing last summer in France in a museum called Lumar. And I spent 1 year digitizing like the soil, water, rocks, different water elements across the wetland with a sound artist called Matt McCorkle. He normally makes the sound installations in the Museum of Natural History in New York. So usually when I create projects as well, I try to create with people that have expertise in other fields, not in art, but that has a passion for something that they can get to unfold in a new way. So Matt kind of turned sound recordings of insects and birds in the soil into almost like rhythmic pop music. And I just came from seeing Char Davies' exhibition as well, and I was really overwhelmed by how similar the design of her work and this work is. And it was kind of mind-blowing to me that Char was making similar work. So I mean, yeah, what is that, 28 years ago or so, 26 years ago. Because in this work, as you're 4 people together in virtual reality, you move around, and as you move around physically, the sounds are changing in the landscape, and the landscape responds to the sound. So it's like people kind of become this instrument in their artwork, and you go down through the soil, you kind of go up into the skies, and you go through different elements from the landscape. And every single element you see on the screen right now are photo scanned. So it looks kind of fiction, but I play with this relationship between like an otherworldly, some kind of magic reality and a very earthy, grounded reality. So every single element is actually photographically scanned and then put together into these new compositions in the artwork itself. And you can kind of like walk through different objects. You can go from like a human scale to like the scale of an insect and kind of change the scale of life all the time in the artwork as you physically move around it. So I've been playing a lot by using virtual reality as a way of entering like the edges of your human perception, because each of these elements in the image right now, you know, you can see they're like this big out in the world. Some of those I scan are like really small, and you can literally see them with your eyes if you pay attention. But most of us don't really pay attention to these kind of elements. Like I didn't know that a trunk could kind of grow through a rock in this wetland and then turn into like salt crystal and be preserved after it died. And it turns into this little sculpture. I had no idea that these processes could happen in the world, but they can. And you can see them with your eye, but they're kind of at the edge of how far you can see, especially when you go to like really small scale, like a millimeter. You can like see a millimeter with your eye, but through virtual reality, you can scale that up like 1,000 times. So that's a big part of my practice working that way. And this is when I install my work. This is the same artwork. So there are 4 people in headsets exploring this landscape together. And I also play a little bit like soil and physical material connected to the actual environment. So on the ground, there are 4 kind of archipelagos, little islands. And each one is made from actual algae and salt from the same landscape. So there's, you know, the landscape where this was made in the Camargue in southern France was like digitized. The same elements I work with a local artist and craftsman to turn into like little physical sculptural soil. So when you go from like our world, you put on the headset, you walk onto the soil, you kind of go to another world. And again, I was really amazed by seeing Char Davies' work, where it's like when I put on the headset in that work, I first go on like a little map to go to a similar world. So I think it's one of the really interesting things of what happens when you put on a headset and you go from a familiar ground to a new one. And it's like you pass through a liminal kind of barrier, and you kind of give into the world. And that's like, to create the works, I need to digitize with a camera. So I take like hundreds of photographs from all points of view of a little object or a little formation in the soil. And we also have microphones through the landscape and digitize the sounds and things. So yeah, so for example, right, so that's kind of the landscape, and this is part of the digital landscape. So this is played with photorealism representation, but the work also becomes completely otherworldly when you're like sink into the ground of it. And then this is the work called Bell. So this is based on the swamps and wetlands around Berlin. So I went from working in southern France in a wetland swamps around Berlin. This is also the work that's at ETHOS right now. So here I worked with, again, also with sound a lot, like in liminal lands, but taking it out of the headset. So there's like a network of computers and screens and speakers in a building. So I thought a lot about how to, I mean, there are screens, but also get away from the screens. So what you don't see in the image here is that the sounds of the virtual environment is moving around you. So like 40 speakers in the architecture. And it maps the virtual landscape onto the natural echo of the building. So you have these sounds as a way of working with virtual coordinates. So I've increasingly become interested in going away from images and working with virtual worlds as sound, because you can really play with space there and mass outside the screen. So here there are screens, but what you don't see is the sound. And the screens kind of pipe into this. It's a huge virtual swamp made from the swamps around Berlin. And it's like, it goes into the soil. So these are like fungal networks, like roots. So for example, in the first image that was shown earlier, where it's kind of like looking at the wetland from like a human perspective, like as if you're in a forest, you also go kind of into the ground. So these networks of mushrooms and fungal networks were made from a canoe. So it's like when you sail on a canoe through a landscape, you can kind of lift up the grass. It's right next to you, at least like 1.5 meters of grass. You lift it up and then you kind of get sight into the underworld. So then I like sail along the canals and digitize these fungal networks as well as the trees on top. So you kind of get this double world in the work. I think I might have spoken enough soon. But just quickly, I want to talk about this work a little bit. It's called Reanimated. So this was a VR work I started doing in 2018. And it was my first like larger kind of full-on virtual reality artwork. I've done several before, but the first one that took it to another scale, where I created a full replica of the Alakai Plateau on the island of Kauai in Hawaii. And on top of this plateau, there used to live a bird that's now extinct. So I interviewed the last ornithologist on his memories of seeing this bird when it was alive. And he also had sound recordings of the bird. So I started digitizing memories. Like I thought about what are all the actual materials you can get from the past of digitized natural worlds that don't exist anymore, and how can you kind of collage them together and create this otherworldly reality. And it's, again, it's also uses your breathing to influence like the environment. There's these rhythms and sounds. So sound impulse is kind of a big part of it. So you go, yeah. So that's like the landscape. This is the visualization of the bird song. So the last time the bird was seen was in 85. It's considered completely extinct. So I thought it was kind of like a ghost. It's like you can listen to species more and more through digital recordings, and sound is very accurate compared to like visual representation, digital media. So you can basically listen to things that are lost. So we kind of have these ghosts in archives. So I like animated the sound of the bird like this kind of ghostly shape that appears and disappears. So it's only visible when it calls in the VR work. Yeah, I think. Oh, yeah. Okay, that's it. That's it.
We have plenty of time. I don't know if there's any questions for directly related to Jakob's work, or we should save them for later on. And I think we should see if we can get hold of the Char. I can see her.
Maybe it's nice to see the Char. There's a whole audience here.
Yeah.
On the other side, there's people sitting, because she can only see it.
Here I am.
There you are. Great. Let's get you.
We can do spotlight then.
Yeah. Can we make it bigger?
Try and see if you can. Yes, perfect. I'll let you know.
So now you're actually also visible here, Char. Welcome.
Thank you.
But then you're covering the beautiful image, so I have to get you a little bit smaller until. So, welcome, Char.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here, quote unquote. I have been living in the forest for the last 2.5 years, and quite literally because of the pandemic. So it's especially wonderful to be connecting with everyone who's here, and also getting to know Jakob's work. So I think what I want to say is that I'm only showing 2 images. This is from Ephémère, which is now almost more than 25 years old. And then I'm going to show an image in a few moments as the antidote. But as Mogens said, there was a winter of VR that happened in about 2000, when all the technology disappeared, the helmets disappeared. So in fact, my medium, my spatial medium, which I called immersive virtual space, I didn't like to use the word virtual reality, disappeared. And so I turned my attention to working with land. And I had bought land, which is this forest. No, we don't want to see that yet. Thank you. In 1994, the same year, I had been beginning to work on Osmose with my team. And because I'd been working in immersive virtual space, I learned to think in the round. And this skill of composing, I turned to thinking in situ in actual space, and I began making immersive environments in the land itself and in the forest, which I am still doing, working with rocks and trees and water to make special places that can enable experiences of perceptual astonishment. That's been going on now for 20 years, but increasing, for at least 20 years, and it's something that I'm still engaged in. But I also began to take technology back into the forest. By technology, I mean the technology outside of excavators and tractors, but computer digital technology. And I first started taking lasers into the forest in 2003, then 2009, and then began to do so intensively in 2010. So for the last dozen years, I've been engaged in a single research project with my current team, who are based in Barcelona, Montreal, and California. And we have been, over a dozen years, creating a portrait of the forest. And I'm not showing images of it because I don't believe in showing work before it's finished. And we've been working on it for more than a decade. The reason being that we have to develop software in order to make the work. It's the metaphor I would use is it's as if you're imagining a kind of sound that doesn't exist. So first of all, you have to create the instrument in order to create the sound. So for the past 8 years, I'd say, we've been developing a custom software called the Seer, which is for working with the results of laser scanning as point clouds. And the purpose that has been driving all of this has been my attempt to visualize the forest not as objects and not as surface appearances, but as space, and as space that is in constant transformation. And this goes back to Osmose and Ephémère all those years ago, because the reason we introduced semi-transparency in those works, which I believe had never been done in real time before then, was due to my deep felt desire to go beyond the world as objects. And there's not enough time to talk about that today. That's philosophically driven about going beyond the Cartesian worldview that renders the world in terms of objects, controlling the world as objects, Heidegger's notions of nature as standing reserve, et cetera, et cetera. I could talk about it for a long time, and today's not the purpose of that. But what I saw in laser scanning technology and point clouds was a way to continue from what we had been doing with the semi-transparency in Osmose and Ephémère. So that's why we began to use the technology, and then have been involved in developing a very powerful software to work with the results of the scanning, because most of conventional uses of laser scanning is to end up with objects with surfaces. It has many practical uses, but not for what I wanted to express philosophically. So that's basically what I've been doing with my team for the last dozen years. And we figured the work would be ready to show in perhaps a year and a half. We're already working with a composer, but I'm not ready to release images of it yet. We've been making much progress, getting together remotely, regularly, getting together physically when we can because of the pandemic, etc. But at the same time that all of that has been going on, I've been also continuing to work with the actual land, and that also goes back to Osmose and Ephémère, because when I introduced the interface of using breath and balance and not using hands, it was to try to enable an experience that would shut down people's habitual ways of being in terms of controlling and reaching out for objects, and shift them to something that was much more contemplative and more about respect and reverence, and turn attention back to a sense of wonder at their own sheer existence. And so that sense of ethics, of trying to go beyond looking at nature as something to control, and instead shifting people to a sense of care, has consumed me hugely for the past number of years, where over the last 25 years, beginning the year I began Osmose, first bought a piece of land here, have bought land a dozen times in 25 years, and now own almost 600 hectares. And it's about caring for that land and learning about the diseases and pathogens that are threatening many tree species here, the invasives, etc. And that stream of activity is completely interwoven with the work we're doing with the digital technology. So for me, the so-called actual and the so-called virtual are completely entwined, both in my creativity here and how I conceive of this place. So I don't speak German. I don't know how to say this word, so perhaps somebody can step in and say it correctly for me. But there's that wonderful word from Wagner that is the German word for a total work of art. And that is very much what this particular place has become for me. And it is a total work of art that includes its digital expression as a portrait that is attempting to go beyond the surface appearances, but also an actual place of places with much that needs to be attended to and cared for. And that takes me to what I think is a really interesting word, which is attending. If you attend to something, it means you're paying attention to it. And in those early works I did all those years ago, I was attempting to have people attend to their own existence, their own embodiment, not VR as escape, but returning their attention to their own, the wonder of the very fact that they even existed. And that is also happening in actuality, because attending can also mean to tend, to care for something or care for someone. So those are concepts which for me are very, very powerful here. And I think perhaps we can now bring up that other image, Mogens, that I asked you to, yes. So I wanted to show this image as an antidote. This is not virtual, as you can see. This took up, aside from the software development and working with my team, this particular entity consumed 4.5 months of my life last year, from May 30th, which was the moment we exposed a tiny bit of rock in a grassy field, to a week before it snowed. This photograph is from mid-November. And this, the reason I'm showing this image and calling it an antidote is this is rock, this is ledge, this is 500 million years old. So what we did by chance was discover this little part of the mountain that I live on, and gradually began to reveal more and more of it. And it's about 2,000, 3,000 square feet, and it's about 7 feet high, that little peak in the middle. And it very much, I would say, the reason it's the antidote is it's 500 million years old. It doesn't care about us. And it's a reminder to me that the Earth will still be here even if we have wiped ourselves out and everything else on the planet because of our actions. So it's somehow very, very grounding. And it also speaks to my creative process, whether it's with digital technology or whether it's directing someone with a pickaxe. I'm not using the pickaxe myself, pickaxe or excavators, to work with the actual land, which is very iterative and involves really a sense of call and response. With the mountain, we don't start off with a plan and execute it. It's really a process of discovery, constant revision, renewal, and that goes for the working process, whether it's the actual or the virtual. So that's probably all I have to say for now, and then maybe we can go into discussion and then questions. And I named this a sky stone because it is as much sky as it is stone, in that it, even if it's static in terms of our perception of time, and it's 500 million years old, it is completely fluid because it changes constantly depending on what's happening with the sky. And I think that that's quite a wonderful thing to behold. So that's all I have to say. Mogens, I hand it back to you.
Thanks. I'll turn off the live bit here. And turn on the camera here again. so you can see us. Can you see us?
No, I can't. I can only see me
Oh, that's
and the sky stone.
and the sky storm.
I'd rather see you. There you are.
Oh, thanks. Well, I have a few questions, but I think we should also open for questions from the audience. And I guess one of the questions is related to the temporality, time.
Yes.
Because you're showing this really old piece of rock here, and I think I read somewhere you were talking about slow media as well. Could you explain a bit about this slow media thing?
Yeah, I was looking at your image and thinking about, as I understand the process of documenting the landscape and its transformation. So for my own work, it's slow because it's like 2 years, but Char's working on a decade, and in the sense that when I created work, we very few people working on a long time. So you have kind of two choices, at least in the way I work as an artist right now. You do a lot of shows and things are kind of moving fast, of having a big team doing many things fast, or in a small team doing all long period. So that's kind of how I do things. And by having the slowness, you don't need any master design. You have continuous iteration. When you kind of move through a landscape, you're focusing on one thing, you take it back to the studio, you start looking at it, the sound, you look at life at a bacteria scale or from a satellite or something, zoom back and forth. And then you can go back again, and you kind of have this continuous iteration and start creating the artwork. So there's no final design before the work starts, right? So what I'm hearing from you, Char, is that if you're documenting this like over time and you're modifying it, that's like an ultra slow approach. Whereas
yes, it's ultra slow, because I think your work is really wonderful and very inspiring, and I see that you're doing it all over the world. So here it's one place for 10 years, so it's yeah, they're kind of different aspects of the same spectrum, but it is very iterative, and it ends up being about relationship. And I would say, as you're conceptualizing this idea of slowness in your work and returning to the same landscape for a specific project and getting to know the biologists and the people you're working with, it's about relationship. So here at Reverie, which is what I named this land many years ago after Gaston Bachelard and the poetics of reverie, and also the notion of reverence, it has involved developing what has now become a very profound relationship with place.
Another thing, I don't know if you named it, Bell in ours, there was this description as a live simulation.
Right.
Is that you wording, or is the museum?
No, that's my wording. So, I mean, that's like Davies was saying with like, I don't consider myself like a VR artist, for example. I more work with like simulations of environments. So it's like, I use a lot of video game technologies. It's kind of where a lot of the explosion of the tools have developed over the past few decades. So it's like you create an environment and then you give it kind of a life. It can interact with people. That can be certain times of day. Like Battle, for example, can go from kind of like a mythological zone to a more like realistical documentary one. So I work both with scientists, but I also work with experts on past folklore and languages. So it was like a project that oscillates between the scientific perspectives on the place and a kind of mythological one. So the simulation, when it lives, just have all these variables, and you kind of hit play, and then it starts doing its own thing. And I don't, like, every time I go see the show, it will look and sound different. I don't really know exactly what it's gonna be like, but there's also like repetition of change. So when you go through, a forest or something for a certain amount of time, if you walk in a circle, it's like you start seeing the same things over and over. And at some point, you're gonna see them different. At some point, you'll notice some details or perspective or color that you can't see at first. but it happens through repetition. So through repeating things in the same area over a long period of time, you can start seeing diversity within it. You can start seeing things that you couldn't see before, but it can only happen through a repetitive pattern, because your eyes can only look, I mean, your eyes are pretty wide like this, right? But you have a total spatial world around you at all times. You can hear sounds, you can sense some, you know, but you can't really focus on all of it. So if you want to soak it all in or see transformation, you have to kind of turn around, look up and down in weird ways continuously. So when we're in landscapes, for example, I think about this also, you know, normally we have a very rational relationship with 3 coordinates in 3D. We can move around, we can control everything. So I kind of have to, like Davis was talking about too, like map the actual landscape and find things in it that I don't know exist. So like, how do you do that? And then make those the base for what is kind of reassembled digitally. So I have like different practices of like maybe take 10 steps forwards the first time, turn around 45 degrees, go a little bit, you know, like look down, look up, kind of like you have to break how you move in order to start sensing a place in these ways. Otherwise, we're so used.
And that is how one experiences an actual landscape. I mean, if you walk in the same place every day, even if you were to follow the same path, it's infinitely different every single day. Or, as you're suggesting, you walk in one direction and you turn, you'll see thousands of things or hear thousands of things that you didn't notice, or something will light up for a moment with a flicker of sunlight, and then it's gone and you'll never experience that again. One of the things that I always enjoyed about Osmose from all those years ago is in between the immersive sessions, we would let the point of view drift. So if somebody was sitting in the sort of the audience room watching and there was nobody performing the work, you would still see on the projection screen things going on as the work just drifted, and it always amazed me because I would see things that I had never ever seen before, even after having watched this hundreds of times. And that's actually like being in an actual forest. It's infinite.
Yeah, perhaps it's like a way of thinking as well spatially, like you have in your forest of these rocks you're showing us right now, for example. It's like, you know, you can see the rocks, you can see the grass behind, you can see the trees, you can see the skies. You have like different layers of overlapping perspectives on a place, and you kind of like undock one that you couldn't see before. So like, I mean, like I said, I came from seeing Osmose right over here, and it's sort of, I was really struck by how like in the top there are these kind of words. It seems like a verbal cultured dimension. Then
Yes.
yeah, like you sink down and then you have the tree and you go into the roots of the tree and into like code as well. And you can like navigate between these. And I was really struck by like similarities. I mean, you probably haven't seen my work, but it's like, I was so struck by a philosophy, a spatial philosophy of moving through objects, going through the surface dissolving, of going up and down, and how that philosophy can only arrive, at least this is what I've learned too, that cannot arrive without learning from a landscape.
Absolutely.
Like learning from the place.
One thing, having seen both of your works within a week or so, you talk about going beyond the surface.
Yes.
And you have been working a lot with transparency. Now you're working with this huge point cloud portrait of a forest, as far as I understand. You have Jakob, you have a lot of detail in your rendering of this forest or the environment. But as far as I remember, when I saw Balbal, there's also a sequence somewhere underwater that looks like a point cloud.
Yeah.
All of this sudden, seemingly realistic scene evolves into a point cloud.
Yeah, it's again, it's similar to what Char Davies is talking about as well. It's like there's something called a mesh. So this is like what we see in film and things. This is, I mean, you might scan something, you have a point cloud, and then you can turn it into like a solid surface. This is what we used to kind of look at virtually and kind of relate in the world. We have specific objects in here, we can move around, put them on top of each other, we can like kind of see them as they are to us, but then you can also go through them. You know, it's like the actual organic world, and if you work with soil, or like in this image we're seeing, you know, it's like the rocks are beneath the soil. It exists, like even when you can't see it. But in Bellwell, for example, you go from the view of seeing things as objects, and then there's this like dissolving effect. So like Char Davies, we have to build a lot of like tools and technologies to make them. So it's sort of like if a camera goes close to an object in the work, it starts dissolving, and then it can go into it, and then it turns into these like point clouds and these webs of data. And it's kind of random how the cameras move around the virtual work. So it's also like a play with perspective. So you can go there one time for 5 minutes. It looks like this more conventional 3D. Then it might transform because the screens are entering into objects, and they turn into this like raw data. And it's also like to make people kind of aware of sense the difference between them, because I mean a lot of people don't know these things, and as like a general audience, you know, it's like, so I also like to show them the different ways of representing one place and let them overlap each other and become one thing and then another. There's also a play with how to represent it, like in the tree with the transparency.
But Char, I would really like to see some images of your next work.
I know.
Yeah. So could you?
I wish I could, but I'm just waiting until it comes to till I have a first version of the work that I think is fully worthy. But I have some stills, as I call them, that have been printed back in 2014, 2015, that I must say, even if I say so myself, are exceptional. But I'm not ready to make them public yet.
I have a question. Can I ask a question, John? So, because you have this landscape, you've been with it for so long and you're digitizing it, is there something in your mind where you're starting to change the landscape with in mind that you're also going to digitize it, like a reverse process? Did you also uncover these rocks, having in mind that they might be interesting to look at in the virtual world as well?
Yes. So this is where the actual virtual is becoming completely intermingled. For instance, if this, I assume from looking at this screen that everyone is still looking at this 500 million-year-old mountain ledge, yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. We have actually captured this. We did so in October. Early November, a week before it was covered with snow, and then it went to sleep for six months. I'm only starting to look at the results of what we captured now, and it remains to be seen whether this is representable. We may discover that, as potent as it is in the flesh, that does not translate into a digital representation. So the jury's still out on that. But yes, in answer to your question, yes, it's like this loop that is beginning to happen where they very much influence each other. And there are other places on the land where I have created, sometimes it's over years, a place that has stones that I have set and water, etc. And sometimes still some of them have not been captured yet digitally, because again, I'm not sure that some of them are worthy, as I say, or we may scan them and then realize that that's not going to contribute to the portrait that I want to make of this land, which is really a portrait of the forest as elements that are constantly in flux. with seeing beyond surface and seeing it all as, I guess the best word I would describe it is as presencing into the present. So I'm not talking about quantum physics. I'm not talking about things as literal as that. I'm talking about something that is much more philosophical. And we're probably 2/3 there. I know my team is listening and watching. And so we're hoping that, you know, we're a small team. There's, besides me, there's 4 of us working on this, and over the past decade. And because the tools that we've had to develop have been necessarily so ambitious to handle hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of points, it's time consuming, because what was out there in terms of softwares that we might have been able to use, they were all made for looking at the world as objects, not for going beyond objects. So that's why we've had to develop the technology.
Even though we can't see the images, could you reel a bit about how will it be shown? How will it be exhibited when it's done?
Oh my, that just makes me feel pressured. Well, I would say that it would be a range from stills, because even stills on paper, some of the images I've created over the last decade have been printed on archival paper. I used to be a painter years ago, so there's something that still fascinates me to work with stills as a composition that are, how can I explain this? Again, our process goes very much in a cycle where, for now, for instance, we're capturing the forest aspects of the land. We're working with the points. We've developed part of the software where we can now be immersed among the points. We can then create stills while being immersed in the flow of the points. And then those stills, and so I may take some of those stills and work with them as a still composition with the software, but then that can feed back into the software and back into immersion. So we've actually created this loop in the creative process that encompasses both the enveloping space of immersion, and even the word immersion now is quite meaningless, because you can, I mean, everything is immersive now. It's a buzzword. So I almost prefer to use the word enveloping space. But then it feeds back into working with 2D, back into the 3D, into the 2D, into the 3D, etc. But more directly to answer your question, I see that the ultimate experience is to be enveloped in a space that is responsive to your movements and your breath in real time, and that includes acoustically. We're already working with a composer on the sound that is constantly responsive to yourself in that space. And so for that purpose, I would say that helmets, stereoscopic head-mounted displays, are probably remain the most intimate way to enable that experience.
Thanks a lot.
And that's about as far as my thinking has gone on it. But when I watched Jacob, I went on your website and I watched that interview you gave when you were sitting in the exhibition space of Barrel. And it's quite wonderful what you have done when you took over that huge industrial building and filled it with those images in transformation and the sound, and you worked with the singer who was walking through the building. That's really powerful and very, very beautiful.
Yeah. I think something that I'm really curious to hear about here too, that I'm kind of thinking is that it's, in one way, if you ask, so what is the final word with something like this? And if you think like an image, then it's almost like the landscape itself, the tractors and the tools become like, in the artist, maybe in your mind, Char, become like virtual tools. Because for people who don't know, it's like, what we kind of used to is that you digitize materials, and then you have so many software packages where you can like sculpt things, modify things, that simulate like the ways you paint or marble and all these things. These have been simulated with actual physics and things for decades for film industry and games. So we have this culture where we're used to having these very sculptural tools on the computer, so we can modify whatever is outside of it as we want. So here it's sort of like this is kind of how I'm thinking a little bit. Like if you say like, okay, the final work is an image, then the landscape and what we're looking at right now becomes a tool to make an image. But if it's from the perspective of the landscape, then the virtual tools becomes a way of looking at the landscape.
It's
So
both.
Yeah.
It's actually both, because for me, again, going back to tools, I now work with excavators, 3 sizes, including a 20-ton excavator that can lift 20,000-pound boulders that come from the property. One thing that happens if you're digging a big pond to store water is you dig up all these fantastic, huge boulders that then I can use elsewhere on the property. But those have become tools as much as a keyboard to me. And so in terms of the artwork, the land itself and these earthworks, of which the sky stone, which is mostly revealed but still needs some final enveloping around it. For instance, there's a big berm I placed all the way around it that sets it aside almost as a sacred space from the secular agricultural space. And I'm learning as I go along, because how do you direct huge excavators, etc. But those are as much tools as the digital tools. But I would say ultimately the artwork is as much the actual land as an image, as a enveloping virtual environment. And in fact, this is what feeds me the most, is to be out there among the infinitely complex, ever transforming actual landscape. That's the source. So if anything, everything I am been doing for the last 10, 15 years has been in conversation with that source. In conversation with the land, and it's a deep conversation, which is almost call and response. So for instance, when we were revealing this, started off with a little patch, had no idea there would be pools that would be revealed, and then as soon as there's pools of water, overnight there's frogs. So it's infinitely, I should say, really addictive and obsessive to be in this creative relationship with this place. So in that way, going back to the idea of still images, if anything, they're instances, an instance, a single instance of an effort to represent the actual land through a certain interpretation, but it's all combined. So I don't know whether I would say, if I'm going back to what you asked, that the tractors and the excavators become tools to make the still image. It's just all completely mixed up. It's completely integrated. And in fact, just to give you a strange example, last summer I found myself awake, I was sleepwalking. I never do this. I was sleepwalking, and the corner of my bedroom with my phone in my hand, trying to take a photograph of a boulder. And then I woke up and I realized, oh my God, I'm standing beside my bed and there is no boulder there. So in that way, it gets it gets completely, I don't know what the word is, but especially I have not left this land for 2.5 years because of COVID. So it's, I don't know, I think my brain has been abducted by, is that the right word, abducted? By the mountain. Yeah, by the mountain. So that's why I named that little blurb that is next to the exhibition when it was talking about what I was doing now, is talking with a mountain. And in the last number of years, and this was even before COVID, something in me shifted. 20 years ago, I went out around the world. I did a lot of public speaking. I was exhibiting those early works. I was publishing essays about my vision for what virtual reality or immersive virtual space could be. And then something in me changed, and I didn't want to be talking to our culture, talking to other people about this presencing of being, this constant becoming all around us. I wanted to engage with the mountain itself. And so I think I became much more, I stopped lecturing, I stopped traveling, and I became fully focused on this conversation I've been having with this particular place. And so it's, yes, it's totally taken over my brain. And this is the first public talk I've given since 2006. And the last public talks I gave, one was in Cumbria in the UK. And because VR was in its winter, so it had died, that talk was about being in relationship with place. And the talk I'd given before that was in Melbourne, Australia, and I talked about being in relationship with place. Back to you.
Yeah. We are very happy and very honored you are attending us today. Perhaps we should open for questions.
And I have to say, I would have loved to have come to Copenhagen. I've never been there. I just wasn't ready to travel yet.
So we have some questions from the audience. Yeah, should you have the mic? Char, don't go seasick or anything. I think I'll turn the camera around so you can see the people asking questions.
Char, do you see yourself or you see the view?
No, I see this guy. I see me now, and I see this guy stone.
Okay.
We have a question. Yeah, let's say hello to Char. Hello. Hope you can see them, Char.
Yes.
Oh, we had a question here.
Yes. I'm really interested in knowing from people working primarily with what's called video.
Cannot hear you.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Maybe
Not very well.
I
Maybe someone can repeat your question.
will turn up the mic a bit. Let's.
just 1 second.
Hello, can you hear me? Hear me now?
Can you hear, Char?
No, I think you need to probably hear his question and then repeat it.
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
Yes.
maybe you can repeat it.
Yeah.
I'm not so good at repeating.
Yeah, so I'm interested in knowing from people working primarily with videos, and especially using software as a medium. Like, what are your reflections on the temporality of technology? And I guess I'm primarily asking you, Jakob, about your simulations. Like, how do you see it as a disadvantage or maybe an advantage not be able to experience the work in its sort of original states from maybe a couple of years from now?
Maybe you want to summarize it, because I think
I can try and summarize. Did you hear it, Char?
No, you'll have to repeat it.
Okay, I'll try to repeat it. As I understood you, when we are dealing with new media art, you're working with these different software packages and software as such. And then you had this, how would that non-immediate feedback from the material, as far as I understood, be an artistic challenge or what?
Yeah, or I mean, in relation to this exhibition now by Char Davies,
Yeah.
the sort of same work has been reconstructed for new
Ah.
technology.
Okay,
So, Char, the question is I'm not supposed to summarize the question, just try and quick. It's about the, what do you call it, the permeable matter of using like tools and technologies that might die.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like I've been dealing with this, and I think maybe it's similar to you, Chai. You can maybe answer that after, but you know, I look back at history. I have the advantage I could look back at early waves of VR. So what I've been doing is that I've been going extremely deep into the technology. So we can change it in our studio, and we have source code for everything. So regardless of what happens out there, companies, tools, and whatever, we have literally like backup computers of every project. The work is also in some museums. They have the same backups. These can never be used for shows. So in multiple locations, in 20 years, I will always have access to the same tools stamped in this moment in time. And we have source code for all ours. So it means theoretically, you can always modify it. Where what's happening a lot now, that's going to be tricky for a lot of artists, is that tools are becoming very standardized, which is amazing because it's becoming very easy to create things. The fallacy is that most tools are not really made for historic context or anything. They're made to just be fast and discarded. They develop so fast. So in 5 years, there might be a lot of artists, art projects and things that are trapped in time because they cannot open up something. But if you manage to have either the knowledge, the expertise, or funding, I always really advise to have like access to your source code, multiple backups, and understand the depth of it, or have someone on your team that can, because then you can always modify it. And I've already encountered this. Just works 5 years ago, we're already like re-updating works continuously. And so that's how I think about it. The other thing is quick for me as an artist. I also struggle a little bit with the historicity of like working as an artist. The idea that works always have to be archived. When we live in a moment where a lot of these mediums are very performative, they're very physical, they're very corporal. So the way I look at it is more like a theater performance. So there might be a recipe, a theme or something, but it can be formed by someone else. So the work can be adapted to whatever future thing might be able to show it, as long as the key core concept is intact. Yeah, so and I don't know, Char, maybe you have a lot of experience in this already.
Well, I think you answered it probably better than I could. In terms of those works, Osmose is now 27 years old. We brought it forward many times. I mean, the first time was to get it off that huge onyx, and we revised the code many times. I mean, the people who could give a more specific answer to this would be one of my team members, John Harrison, who was part of the original well, he wrote the original code for Osmose and Ephémère. Then we weren't working together for a few years, and then he came back, but he's had a history with those works for years. And then I'd say about 6 years ago, Glenn joined us specifically to restore Osmose and Ephémère again and restore their sound. And their sound was running basically on equipment that had become completely obsolete. So we put a lot of effort into working, basically restoring them so that they would come alive again. But I think that in terms of what we're doing now, we because the work we've been creating for the last decade is all our own source code, we have control over that. However, we are dependent on peripheral software tools that might become obsolete. But believe it or not, I'm not a technologist. I have a strange ability to be able to push the technology, to push the tools, to push the software development in terms of what I want to express and what I want to say, but I'm not a programmer. And so the folks who could answer that question best would be the software team, who I know are watching from their various locations, but they would be able to give a more specific answer than I can to that. So I think you just gave a great answer.
But it's both a question about the software, as you said, the source code, the source being able to change the software to a new platform. But some devices like the winter of VR, where you couldn't get the head-mounted display, you had to repair the old ones. And in your case, Char, with the breathing vest you have in the installation, this is specific hardware as well. So it's both a hardware and a software question to preserve these works.
Yes, we actually, we redesigned the vests for the breathing and the balance several times. And I remember in '96 going out to the company called Division, who were making helmets, and buying up their last 6 helmets because they were going bankrupt. And then we cannibalized those helmets to fix the 2 helmets we already had when they were breaking during exhibitions. And after that, there were none. There were none, and everyone said VR is dead. At that time, it wasn't so much the internet or social media. It was a huge excitement over big spheres. And the idea that anyone would want to create solitary immersive experiences using a helmet was considered completely uninteresting. So it's kind of ironic what has happened since. Even if I'm not sure what has happened since with the kinds of companies that are developing all this technology, if it's a good thing. I guess we'll see.
Yeah,
I can't see you guys, by the way. I can only see me. Can we see each other?
Review.
Oh.
now.
There, that's better. Thank you. Okay, excellent.
But we're running a bit late. So if there are no more questions, last question? No? I think we will end it here. Say thanks to Jakob, saying thanks to Char. Hope to see you soon in Copenhagen.
Absolutely, I would love to come.
So let's wave to Char and then.
And Jakob, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Bye.
And do praying hands to say thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.